Right, good evening, everyone.
Oh, sorry.
I'm afraid you've drawn the short straw with me again. But quite seriously, it's a great pleasure for me to, what I'm going to do is conduct some very short interviews because tomorrow we're moving into survivor mode. And we're going to be, not completely because we have Christopher Ash as well, but we're going to be listening to survivors. We've already listened to Linda with her integral role in responding. I'm going to start with Pastor Luc. Pastor Luc lives in Grand Goave, which is very near Petit Goave, which I showed you where that was on the map, didn't I, earlier, so you'll all remember that. But I'm going to ask you, Pastor Luc, if you would just share a little bit with us about your situation in Grand Goave, your church, your children's home, and your school. Tell us a little bit how that started. And tomorrow we'll look more at the earthquake experience itself, but just tell us a little bit about yourself and about the work you are doing in Grand Goave.
Yes, so I born in one family of 12.
You were born in one family of 12? Wow.
12. So very far in the north. My dad used to be a voodoo priest. And when I was 8 years old, one of my uncles asked my mom to bring me to Grand Goave, where I am now. Because he used to have a salt pond, and he got a boat, and he filled his boat with a lot of salt. And he traveled to Grand Goave, Petit Goave, and finally got married in Grand Goave. And when I was 8 years old, he asked my mom if my mom can give me to him, and he could put me in good school in Grand Goave. And my mom do so.
Because
education was very important. Mm-hmm. And then he put me in one his boat. I spent 7 days in that boat to get to Grand Goave, and he go to his car. And when I get there, he don't really want to put me in school. He would treat me like his own slave. He did have a bakery. They make bread and send me in the street to sell the bread. And I have to beg him to go to school. Finally, we make a deal. I told him I will work for him in the morning and he can send me to school in the evening. And we agree for that. And then I asked him also to bring me to see my family every 4 years.
4 years?
4 years, then he do. Whenever I go there, my dad go to the bush, cut off all kind of leaves, and make big portion, and bath all of us, and tell us nothing cannot happen to us, as a black magic.
This is with voodoo?
Voodoo, yeah, only voodoo. So, and when I 16 to 7 years old, I went to see my family and found my young sister very, very sick, troubled by evil spirit. And my dad tried all kind of black magic to get her better. He even took another voodoo priest to help him out. And finally, 8:30 in the morning, in her own mouth, the evil spirit said she will be dead at 12 o'clock. And 12 o'clock, she died. That got me so deep. I got so disappointed, as my dad always tell us, we have enough power from the voodoo, nothing cannot happen to us. And I start to think I need something better than what my dad have. And those days, I don't know what it is. Nobody can tell me about Jesus. And I stayed there for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, I went back to Gangwave. One Sunday evening, I found myself dressed up and walked to one street called Saint-François Street and turned by the cemetery street and found a group of the people. And a big open air service, worship the Lord. And I found myself go close to them. And two thoughts came in my mind. One told me, Luke, walk away. One told me, you have to go among those people and receive me. And finally, one young man I used to tease very badly, he used to come to my Uncle Bakery, told me about Jesus. I used to lay my hand on him and tell him, why you don't receive Satan? You can have more power. He was among those people and see me. And he ran, he took my hands and he gave me a chair. Oh, I got a palpitation. My heart beat so fast. Finally, I cannot resist. And I said to him, I will turn my life to the Lord. And I do so. I took that so seriously. After 2 months, I started to preach gospel. I lost all my friends. They said, now Luke is crazy. Because I take that so serious. And I work and I get some more school and work under one senior pastor. I was his junior pastor for 18 years. 18 years. And then we built 3 churches, one in Gangwave City, 2 in the countryside. And what he do, he bought all the land and his own name. In Haiti, you don't have to make any will for your kids to get your heritage. And he passed away in 1992. We bury him October 17, 1992. And December 5, I will never forget that. His kids called me for a meeting. They show me all the papers. And then they said, we are only one who heritage our father. And then we did have one children home with over 60 some kids.
So you had a children?
Yeah, okay. That was the pastor. I was house father, right, and a junior pastor. Right. And then we start to discuss from 1 o'clock to 8:30. One of his kids was married to a captain. That time was military giver Aristide coup. The military was in power. We discussed from 1 until 8:30. They said to me they're going to close the church. I said, why? This is a church. This is where we come to pray. It's not a factory. Then the captain said to me, somebody tell me, you're so stupid, you're arrogant. I said, no, they don't tell you the truth. Take my place. You are a captain. You come after a colonel. Yeah. If your master got died, can you let enemy come and destroy the base? I said, this is me. I deal with that pastor, deal with that work with all my life. So reason why I tell you, if you close the church, where are the people going to pray? And they said to me, they're going to kick all the kids out. That was my main problems. Because most of those kids, I bring them from over my little hometown, far from Gonaive area. I beg them and beg them. I even kneel down. Finally, 8:30, they kick all the kids out. And I heard my wife's voice said to the kids, let's go home. We did have a 1,200 square feet home. We bring 60 some kids in that 1,200 square feet home.
66 kids?
66 kids.
1,200 square feet.
Yeah. Next thing I know, all church members join us. My front porch was my pulpit. My front yard is a church. And 60 kids inside. Next thing we know, we start one school with 150 kids in the same place. We pack like sardine. Especially in the morning, we line up waiting for each other to go to the only one little out home, washroom. We spent 10 years like that. Now I take care of those kids, send them to school, and take care of the church.
Now, these children, were they genuine orphans? Were they from, were their parents, had their parents died? Or were they children who their parents couldn't look after them? Or were there a mixture of these?
That some of them, both parents die, they're orphan. Some of them, even though parents are alive, they cannot take care of them. So, I take care of them, and I remember the first people start to help me, which is a lady called Claire Roberts. She used to help one young man to the Compassion International. After that young man finished his high school, the Compassion dropped him. And she's
Compassion International.
Yeah, international. So she still want to put him in some college. I don't know how she got my name. She sent me money, and I put him in 3 years of accounting, 2 years in English class, 1 year in sanatorium. You got TB. And then he got a good job in post office. And finally, Claire decided to come to see him. In 1996. And she come down to meet that young man. And I meet her at the airport, bring her to my place. And she see my situation with all those kids. And she take the name, she look for sponsorship for them. Whenever she send one little money, and I put it in one pot, and I take care of them all. And
I'm going to stop you at that point because we'll have more of you tomorrow.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Linda, you've been sharing with us your medical experience working with Ebola and with cholera, etc. this afternoon. I hope you won't mind me asking you this. Can you share with us, and you must say if I've overstepped the mark in this, can you share with us from your perspective as a doctor, but also as a Christian, in the work you've been doing, what was your lowest moment and what was your highest moment?
think there have been multiple moments that I considered low moments. And I think the Ebola response was definitely the most challenging response that I've been part of. But subsequently, I've been part of other responses like the Syrian refugee response in Greece, and that was very challenging.
If you treat the microphone as a bit of a lollipop.
Sure, is that better?
That's good.
I think the sense of despair towards the end of July 2014, when the international community chose not to respond or provide assistance to the 3 affected countries, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, when it was needed. There was a rapid scale up in the number of cases, and more people were dying with limited bed capacity for treatment, capacity to conduct surveillance, capacity to really respond from a humanitarian perspective. And I'm not just talking about the clinical response. As I mentioned, there was a lot of food insecurity. There were humanitarian protection issues that needed to be addressed, social mobilization, community engagement, but there wasn't enough staff. And for me, when you see a need, I think it's important to respond, I think, as a Christian, but as a human being. And when the world turned a blind eye to West Africa, I was extremely devastated, and I think Natalie can say the same, because we had invested our time, our energy, our resources in this response. And to see that many people die without having a response that was adequate or appropriate was extremely devastating. And I've seen this happen in multiple places around the world, including DRC, where there's been a crisis for more than 20 years with limited response from the international community. There's been a lot of gender-based violence in Eastern Congo. There are more displaced people in Eastern Congo, in actually all of DRC, than there are in Syria, Yemen, Iraq. And these are places that are experiencing a pretty large humanitarian crisis. I think generally, when you see the needs that exist in the world, and the limited ability or the limited willingness, the willingness is not there to respond to these crises, I think that's always been a challenge. When refugees were coming through Greece from Turkey during the winter, and we didn't have shelter that was actually warm enough or insulated, and babies were dying of hypothermia, and the Greek government refused to let us place heaters in those shelters. That was extremely devastating, because we knew what to do, we had the resources, but it was a question of political will that wasn't there. And when you see people die of preventable diseases, and you see them die of things, babies die of hypothermia when they don't have to, I think that makes me extremely upset and frustrated.
Sure. From a doctor's point of view, it must be terrible.
Absolutely, because I think the reason why you go into medicine is to really mitigate mortality. We can't completely prevent death, because there have been cases where you do provide clinical care and a patient dies anyway. But in cases where you can make a difference, and there's another confounder, there's a reason why you're unable to really affect the situation, I think that's been very frustrating.
What helps you? We say disasters bring out the worst and the best in people. Just talking about the worst, which is what you're focusing on the more, what helps you cope with those situations?
I think definitely prayer. And in Liberia, we had a chaplain, his name was John Freiler. And when things would get bad, he would just tell us, stop for a moment, let's pray. And that's where I got my strength from. I got my strength from God, I got my strength from prayer. And one of my favorite scriptures is, his strength is made perfect in weakness. And I realized that when my hands are tied and I can't do anything, either as a clinician, as a human being, that God's strength is made perfect in those times because I can call out to him. And I remember being in a refugee camp in Greece, and it was freezing outside, and I had a coat. And there were multiple refugees who didn't, and I was trying to speak with a colleague from the UN, and we were trying to find a solution. I had to step away. I had to go pray because of the frustration and the sense of, why is this happening? There are resources that can prevent this, and yet we're still allowing it to happen, allowing these babies to essentially die from hypothermia.
And your highest moments? Do you have any?
I do. There are a lot of high moments, I think, seeing people recover from deadly illnesses. I think in September 2014, I was in Washington, D.C., and Camp Brantley was testifying before Congress. And he was trying to advocate for additional funding for the West Africa Ebola outbreak. And it was amazing to be able to sit there and to see him speak with these congressmen and convince them to provide funding.
Right.
And as a result of that, the US government provided millions of dollars for the Ebola response. I think seeing patients recover, in Haiti, time and time again, when you had patients recover from cholera, you would hydrate them quite quickly. They would come in almost dead, and you would provide hydration, antibiotics, and within hours, they would be able to stand up and walk. So to see patients go home and recover from this illness really made me happy. So it's definitely worth all that trouble when you see improved lives and suffering that's alleviated.
Thank you. Thank you. Ken?
I think this is working.
Use this one.
You're part of the faculty at the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, which in a sense, and these are my words, not yours, is a community within a community. But a community that was nevertheless very badly affected by the flooding as a result of, not of Katrina, but of the fall of the levees. And you were there at the time. Describe for us what that was like, if you can, please, in a quarter of an hour, both for the seminary itself and for you and your family.
Yes, I had been in New Orleans at that time for, I guess, 23 years, and we'd had numerous hurricane scares, tropical storm scares, and I had never left for any of those. Now, my family had. My wife wanted to get out of town for a number of those, but I wanted to stay, partially because I wanted to experience what it was like to be in a hurricane, and partially because I wanted to be there to help in case any of our church members needed help. But when Katrina was in the Gulf and for a time was a Category 5 heading our way, I knew that I probably couldn't be much help. I would be a liability instead of a help if I survived. So I did leave. We took the standard 3 days worth of clothing with us because we're always back in 3 days after a evacuation. So we left, and the next day we began to hear reports of the flooding in the city. We had friends that lived in New Orleans off of our campus. Our home was on the seminary campus. And my wife told them, go to our house. You'll be dry there, because their house was flooding at the time. And certainly our house did not flood for another 12 hours. So the people that were on the seminary campus had to evacuate as soon as they could. I was in North Alabama. We went to my mother's home, my wife, and we had 2 children still at home in the 9th grade, twins. And then I carried a grandmother whose grandchild attended our church, and 2 grandchildren. She had no way out of town, so she rode with me and the 2 grandchildren, and we went to Alabama. And the next day began to hear of what was happening. A few days later, a helicopter flew over, and they showed the footage on CNN, and I saw my house on CNN, and it was underwater. So that's when we really began to consider what was happening. And as Linda mentioned, that passage from 2 Corinthians 12, that when we're weak, he is strong, that passage had always been one of my favorites, but never before had it meant as much as it did at that time, because I realized I was homeless. Everything I owned that was salvageable was in a suitcase now. And I did bring my one computer with me. So I had a computer and a suitcase. And so we began to assess that. The first few days were very difficult. We began hearing from our friends. Cell phones didn't work. Texting, I was just getting into texting. Texting would work at times, but phone calls over cell phones would not work. So we began to gradually hear from our friends at seminary and from a few of our friends at church, and they were scattered from Texas to Georgia, Alabama. I think our seminary faculty and students went to about 26 states in evacuation. So we didn't know what was going to happen. Our church was flooded. Our home was flooded. Our place of our main employment at the seminary, where most of our income came from, was flooded, and we didn't know if the seminary was going to survive. We continued to have classes. The seminary had probably about $60 million worth of damage. I was pastoring Elysian Fields Baptist Church. I'll talk a little bit about that. Our church was a total loss, and the church that we would eventually merge with had $1 million worth of damage. So things didn't look very good at the time. The seminary, after a week or so, called a meeting for all the seminary faculty to come together and to see how we could salvage things. So we went to Fort Worth, Texas, to the campus of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. The president there was a brother-in-law of our president, Dr. Chuck Kelly, and they invited us to come there and try to regroup. So we did. The seminary spouses, or at least the wives, went in one place, and they began to talk to each other and cry with each other, whereas the faculty, we didn't get to talk. We got to listen to how we were going to put things together and how we were going to switch all of our classes to online classes for the rest of that semester. So we came up with a plan, and we did that. So it was a hectic time. In the immediate days after the storm, our grandmother that came up with us, she sat glued to the TV looking for family members. She had about 6 children. She knew where none of them were. The 2 grandchildren came with her, and she had 6 children and several other grandchildren. She was looking on CNN, other news, to try to see somebody that she knew. She was glued there. Eventually, we found them in different places, different churches. We actually had a former church member, church staff member, that pastored church in Mississippi. He called to see how we were and said, "Do you know a..." And he called her name, and I said, yes. Actually, he was talking to my wife, and she said, yes, she's sitting right here with us. He said, I have several of her children and grandchildren here in our church. So through that process, she found her children And on the Red Cross website, we found others, and eventually they were all right, and they were able to reconnect in South Texas, and everybody was okay. I couldn't sleep for days. I found myself looking on the internet, trying to find satellite pictures of our church, and was unsuccessful for several days. And finally, I found one quirky website that had the satellite pictures, and it took me about 2 hours to narrow down the location to our church. And I saw that it was not good. Things were not good. Part of our roof was gone. Another part of our church roof was bad already. But finally, after, friends and in Alabama began bringing clothes by for this grandmother and her children. Friends at our home church there where we had grown up began sharing with us, giving us some money to try to get new clothes, new shoes, things like that. And we got our children enrolled in school. They begged us to homeschool them for a year or to let them play hooky for a year, but we knew they had to be in school, and we got them in school. And within a few days after they began to go to this rural school, they were in school in the New Orleans area, in an urban school, and got in this rural school, which we thought they would hate, and they fell in love with it. And within a few days, they said, "Dad, Mom, we want to finish school here." They were in grade 9, had 3 3/4 years still to go, and they said, "We want to stay here." We laughed and said they'll get over it, but they didn't. They said, "We love you, Mom and Dad, but we really want to stay here with our grandmother, and we'll see y'all as often as we can." So through a lot of tears and agony, after several months went by, when our house was reconstructed in New Orleans and we could move back, they stayed. And that was the hardest thing we've ever done, to leave them in Alabama and go back. I thought the first night we were back in New Orleans, I thought I was going to suffocate with the grief of leaving them back in Alabama. My wife would drive up to Alabama, a 6.5-hour drive, one way, every weekend, at least 3 weekends a month for 4 years, or the remaining 3 years. She did that to check on them, to take care of them. I was doing church on weekends, so I couldn't go back nearly as often. But we saw them do well. They bloomed there. They were really celebrities there. They were the hurricane survivors, about the only ones in around where they were. They got their picture in the newspapers locally, and they got to play football and basketball, and my son played football, my daughter played basketball, but they did very well. When they graduated from high school, the principal of the school came up to me and said, "Thank you for letting Jordan and Jessica go to school here," because I think they made a real influence. They had great influence on others, and were able to develop relationships, and it was a difficult time for all of us, but it was a growing time. It helped us trust the Lord for their care when we couldn't be there as often as we could. Back to the seminary for the first semester. Katrina happened on August 29, 2005, starting in the middle of September. Well, actually, it was about the 3rd week in September. All of our classes went to an online format. Classes continued. Most students stayed in the courses. Almost all of our classes continued throughout the semester. And we had graduation in December. We had it in Birmingham, Alabama, because we couldn't have it on campus at that time. But things gradually began to come together. Some of our faculty left, went to other places as they were in other states. They got offered positions at churches and at other schools, and a few left, but the great majority of our faculty came back together, and it was a heroic year. Our president often talks about the heroicism of our faculty. I don't know if it was that heroic, but it was hard work. During the first few months that I taught, we only had dial-up internet service. My mother lived in a rural area, and we could not get high-speed internet until we finally got satellite internet after a few weeks. So instead of taking an hour to upload a file, could upload a file now in a minute or so. So it helped greatly. But we saw a lot of good things happen there, and then as we began to move back to campus, so many volunteers came and worked on our campus and worked on our church, and we moved back almost 11 months after the storm. We were able to move back into our refurbished home that had 5 feet of water in it, and we began a new year, and I'll talk more about the church tomorrow, but God was good, and it was a grueling time. I remember going through nights when I could not sleep. I could not sleep at all. I was stressed. I was worried about church. I was worried about seminary. I was worried about our friends. I was worried about my family and what we were going to do, and just couldn't sleep for a while. But finally, sleep returned, and things got much better because my family was not real happy with my state of mind during the time when I wasn't sleeping. I was not the most pleasant person at that time, but when sleep returned, all was good again. Just a lot of work ahead of us.
Just very briefly, Ken, as we draw to a close, one thing I'm very anxious to bring out, what is it like, or what was it like for you when you first went back and saw your place? What's it like to go back to a home that's had this kind of inundation?
Yeah, it was approximately 5 weeks before the city would allow residents to come back in, and before the seminary would allow faculty and staff and students to come back in, and we had a very limited period of time to do that. And we walked in and had a friend that was there to meet us. He said, "It's bad, be ready." And we knew it was, but we thought we would salvage some things. But as we walked in, we saw there was almost nothing to be salvaged. So it was pretty devastating. Slightly humorous. It wasn't humorous at the time. The event was I had a very nice black suit that I had bought for my son's wedding. Nicest suit I had ever had. Heart Shafter remarks. And I had carried it, I thought, to Alabama when I left. It was in its bag, and I carried it to Alabama. And when I opened the bag, I realized I'd carried one of my very cheap, shoddy suits in it. So when I got in and we began to look through our clothes, I opened the bag, and there was my Hart Shafter Mark suit in with salt water soaking it and absolutely ruined. So it was tough. We were able to go through, and we salvaged about 7 plastic tubs of things out of the house. I was able, even before that, to go by the church for the first time. And it was before the city had allowed us to go back in. They had Army patrols at each exit off the highway, and I thought, I'm going to go and I'm going to beg. I'm going to say, my church is just 2 blocks off the highway here. Would you let me go in? And it turned out I got behind a construction crew that was allowed in, and a construction crew was behind me. So they just waved me on through there. So I went in. I was expecting to see church members around. I was expecting to see things, but I stopped at the church. The church was a horrible mess. Water was still inside the church. Our communion table, which weighed about 500 pounds, had floated about 90 feet from one end of the church to the other. The halls were wet, were moldy, and it was quite an experience. I drove around our neighborhood expecting to see some folks working, but there was nothing. There were no dogs. I saw one cat. There were no birds. It was a disgusting and discouraging sight initially. So that first trip back was very bad. They got better as help began to arrive, but it was very tough. It was traumatic for everybody.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you to all three of you. I realize that this is not the easiest thing to talk about, your own experience of the highs and lows of tragedy. But thank you very, very much, and can we join in thanking them?